And we're live. Hey everyone, my name's Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc Labs, and welcome to our latest live event. It's a bit of a change of pace, this one, actually. We've done a lot of kind of discovery around business related issues around eIDAS wallets and things like that. But there's a really, I think it's a very topical time to be having this discussion. We're going to be looking at a little bit inside World ID, which is being represented today by their head of identity, Ajay. But more broadly, we're also going to look at how proof of human is becoming more and more required in today's world. We've got lots of very topical issues happening around networks like Moltbook, and so it feels like the right time to be having this discussion. And we'll probably start off looking a little bit at World ID or World. They've taken a lot of very unique approaches to ensuring that that they know how to represent unique humans. And so we'll talk a little bit about that with AJ. And then we'll also think about how that fits into the broader digital identity landscape. And to help with that, we've got Kim Hamilton Duffy, who I'll get both to introduce themselves in a second. So Kim is formerly the executive director of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and she's got a startup in stealth mode. So we'll not find out about that on this webinar, but we'll maybe find out more about that later on. But great to have both AJ and Kim onto the show. So thank you very much for coming on, guys. Welcome on to Doc Labs webinar.
Thanks for having
us.
Thank you.
So yeah, kind of getting into it a little bit, the structure itself will be somewhat familiar. We'll have a Q&A, really a discussion is what we're looking for amongst the three of us for kind of 40, 45 minutes. And then we'll look for audience questions to come in towards the end of the event. You'll be watching this on Riverside. And so you can, as an attendee, add your question into the Riverside chat, and Francisco will curate those questions behind the scenes, and we'll make sure that we ask as many of them as we possibly can to AJ and to Kim towards the end of the event. Thank you very much for attending if you're doing so live, but also watching on demand, as I know many of you do later on. But if you are watching live, please let us know where you're calling in from. It's always great to see the geographical spread that we get. So without further ado, AJ, if I could hand over to you first to kind of let us know just a little bit about what World ID is, and also a little bit about yourself. Some background would be great.
Yeah, my name's Ajay. I lead World ID at Tools for Humanity. So all the forward-looking product strategy, go-to-market, a lot of our integrations, so working with relying parties is like a really big focus. My background, spent a lot of time in wireless access networks, in payments and identity, really looking at full stack problems, trying to develop kind of unified seamless experiences for users that lead to sustainable revenue. And I spent a lot of time at Google actually working full stack and built a team called Payments Identity. And what I noticed there was that, if you're trying to build data minimized seamless experiences for users with common sense data governance, it's actually really hard. You end up going across multiple systems, so there's like really challenging systems problems. And a lot of it kind of so I'm kind of going to start with kind of the problem statement, but like if you think about like what's happening now on the internet, like what's kind of changed, like AI really crossed the realism threshold, and so we kind of experience bots and scaled abuse and repeat offense across like a lot of different use cases. You kind of see like the cost of that is fraud and impersonation and synthetic users or bot-driven manipulation, and then farming, right? You kind of every day on X I see somebody showing a simulation of hundreds of phones. But like there's been a shift in technology. Like there's actually like advanced cryptography that can really help solve the problem at the root in a private way, right? And that's really kind of the premise for World ID. At the outset in 2019, when the first white paper came out, it was really about, as AI becomes more sophisticated and, AGI kind of comes, it's going to be really important for us to rethink all of the tools we use. all of the tools we use right now kind of think about are built human first, and we really need to bring AI as a first class primitive so we can differentiate the two and provide experiences that are catered, right? And so if you think about like that problem, it's really important to be able to identify humans versus bots with really high assurance. Today, or at least right now, you do that with CAPTCHAs or KYC. And KYC was really developed for regulated use cases. But now it's really invasive. Everywhere you go, you're being asked for more data. And so World ID has kind of two parts to it. So if you think about like the protocol kind of follows a lot of the decentralized identity principles, where you have issues with credentials, you have wallets, we call them authenticators, and then you have relying parties that kind of accept proofs from the protocol. And there's a few principles that kind of drive how we build, and a lot of it comes from like ease of use challenges that I really saw across the Google ecosystem. Like, and the litmus test for me is, my mom should be able to use whatever this identity primitive is, right? So it should be unshareable. You shouldn't be able to lose it. And if you're going to share it, it should be through explicit delegation, right? So some of the things that I'll talk about, like we haven't fully figured out. I don't think there's really a way to do it that we can point to, and I think we're going to talk about it later. And then there's the credentialing part of it, where we really believe that you need a new primitive for the internet that allows users to prove that they're unique humans online, without identifying themselves. And so how do we do that? And so the method that Tools for Humanity that we've come up with as a part of World ID, is based on biometrics. And biometrics are kind of the really only way that you can kind of prove that someone is a real human in the world, regardless of sort of their situation, right? Where they're born, what their status is, or whatever legal identity system they have. Like there's a billion people that don't have legal identities, right? But how do you build that in a privacy preserving way? And so if you think about the proof of human credential that World issues, it's really derived from a biometric. And so there's a multi-party compute backend. So the backend is this cryptographic database that's like distributed to make it private, secure, anonymous. And then the credential really represents your uniqueness. And so if you think about the set of all humans that have registered, we're able to generate a cryptographic proof that you're a unique human that's represented in that set without identifying who you are in that set. And that's really what the proof of human credential is. And then the protocol is really about the life cycle of the user. And so for a relying party, you authenticate, and then there's a bunch of things that you're going to want to do, whether you need to verify your age or buy something or whatever. And how do we think about the protocol and interoperability across issuers, authenticators, and relying parties to really enable that experience? And so that's kind of the two parts of World ID.
Yeah, and it's pretty lofty ambitions there as well, AJ. I mean, there's a lot you covered there, but it's not a small problem that you're trying to overcome, it sounds like, and definitely looking forward to kind of digging into some of those kind of high level details that you provided there. So super interesting. Kim, and if I could pass on to you as well, Kim, we kind of know each other because you were the ED at Diff for a good couple of years there, maybe 3 years. Time flies. And then you're kind of moving on to your own startup. So it'd be great if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of what interests you in the topic, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and great to join you and AJ today. So I'm Kim Hamilton Duffy, spent close to 2 decades engineering, building reliable, scalable systems at places like Microsoft before going deep on decentralized identity. And most recently, so I've been involved in DIF, Decentralized Identity Foundation, from the beginning in various ways. The steering committee participant, I continue to be very active, but yes, most recently as ED of DIF, and now I'm back to building. AI agents are operating in the real world slower and faster in some ways than anyone expected. But the infrastructure to make that secure and accountable just doesn't exist yet. So that's the problem I'm focused on now. We'll get into that more maybe in a future episode, but excited to dig in today, as you mentioned, very timely topics for us.
Yep. And there's a lot happened, like I was kind of just leading into this a little bit at the start, but there's a lot happening over the last 18 months a lot more bot activity, and we've seemed to have moved from a place where previously security teams would just keep bots out at all costs. There wasn't a decision to be made, and now we're having this tectonic shift into needing to start letting some bots in again. I mean, it's I think what you were saying, Kim, is correct. This thing is coming at a great speed, and it's potentially more pervasive now than maybe we even think it is, because I'm not even sure all the analytics tools that exist for platforms are able to register when bots are actually going to sites in different platforms. So it feels like now more than ever, there's this urgent need for proof of human. Kim, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of factors. First, the AI agents went from experimental, and no one really knew if anyone's deploying it for real outside of their organization, and went from experimental to operational really fast. And I think, as we were talking about, OpenClaw and Maltbook recently is a very timely example. They put 1.5 million crustacean-themed agents online in under a month, including mine, now decommissioned. But so they're communicating, collaborating with each other and with humans, checking in code. But the capabilities outpace the readiness. That was very visible, not just from the result of maybe under secure vibe coded apps in databases, but most people deploying the agents didn't realize that, for example, if they were deploying locally, that they were granting ambient authority, where the agent inherits all the secrets in their environment by default. And even if someone has the know-how to deploy these, the methods and infrastructure to properly manage agent permissions and capabilities barely exist. So the second area, which you touched on, is that traditional bot defenses like CAPTCHAs are failing in a couple of ways. So AI can solve them, but then the complexity is increasing to the point that they're pretty good at deterring me from using sites. So, I recently it escalated into a series of 10 puzzles of matching pixels, and so it's getting unfeasible. So at the same time, to sort of round out the discussion, I would say the problem is more nuanced than just proof of unique human person that we're touching on. So it's important to tease apart the use cases and requirements. My biggest concern has always been that the reaction of many sites seems to be, okay, well, now we need to get your government ID with every interaction. And we're dealing with a lot of different use cases. So government benefits, financial transactions, yes, you need government ID. UBI, proof of unique human, that makes sense. Human-focused social media maybe wants proof of human, may not necessarily need uniqueness. In some cases, just basic bot deterrence is needed. But then on the other hand, we have AI agents that will be acting online, and at that point what you need is accountable delegation. So the main risk is bots escalate, the platforms default to government ID or more invasive techniques. We're starting to see that already. Most interactions need much less, and so I am temporarily calling it, for lack of a better term, high assurance, narrowly scoped credentials. We'll talk about what that means, but basically something that's matched to the actual context.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the point you were making about needing to overshare data right now, I think was something that AJ was talking about, maybe about around how KYC was originally, designed to be used, and how it's kind of become something else over time. And AJ, I don't know if you want to come in any of the points that Kim made there, but also keen to understand your perspective on, are we overreacting to this problem? Like, I mean, I sometimes feel like I live in an echo chamber where I'm very, very bullish on the AI market, and it feels like there's really something happening at scale and quickly. But are we overreacting to this problem, or are we underestimating it?
I think everyone recognizes the opportunity, like the opportunity for AI to accelerate all of us. Like, one of my really good friends who's not a coder was texting me about how he was able to follow a Reddit thread and create his own Claude bot. And so that kind of like, it's pretty inspiring. It's really inspiring a lot of people to build and try things. So I think that like there's a massive opportunity. And to Kim's point, like what are the guardrails? Like I think we need, like the whole stack needs to be rethought, right? So putting like the human side of it, like at the entry point, yes, what's authenticating? Is it a human or a bot? But then if you think about all the layers of security and, like how does like access control work, and how does, and so you kind of have, if you start the life cycle of the user, whether the user is a human or a bot, what's the appropriate interface for them? We're seeing sites, not, kind of explicitly saying that bots are not, AI agents are not allowed to access my site, right? We're seeing that online because they don't know how to handle the traffic. They don't know how to, and there's actually like a real thing where what's the liability, right? If your bot goes and buys, a ton of stuff using your payment token, because to Kim's point, you had everything, gave it full access to your wallet. When you charge that all back, like who's actually liable, right? Because you actually didn't take the action, something did on your behalf, but there isn't really any rules there, right? So I think, I don't think there's an overreact. I mean, there's definitely like an overreaction in some ways. Like, like Maltbook is like, I was seeing tweets that people were like, "Oh, Skynet's here," right? I don't think it's that extreme. These are kind of contained and mostly human prompt driven, but you can kind of see how like things can go haywire, right? And there's examples of like security keys being kind of vomited out, stuff like that. And so I think there's like a really important thing that technologists and product people need to sit down and think about, like, what does it mean to build the entire life cycle, and what are the principles that should guide that building. I think that there's definitely like an overreaction, I think, from a, hey, what could possibly go wrong. I think there's an appreciation for the value that AI is going to bring to the world. And then I think from a technology perspective, everyone's across, like, as usual, everyone's across an entire spectrum of like, YOLO, let's go make it happen, to let's be really conservative. And I think the answer is probably somewhere in between.
Yeah. And it tends to be the technologists and the developers that are a bit more maybe gung-ho about things than others. But I think so. It sounds like there's a combination of technical challenges. The whole stack needs to be kind of rethought, was your comment. But then also you're bringing up questions around liability, which is obviously kind of getting into the business and legal domain. So it certainly seems like there's an awful lot of stuff to be done, because certainly in our experience, whilst the technical challenges and development are certainly not trivial, they're often the things that can get sorted out very quickly. And the legal challenges, standards, things like that, they tend to take a lot longer in our experience. And so, Kim, coming back to you, I think one of the things that was kind of keen to touch on with you is, like, where are there other gaps that exist in the current digital ID infrastructure that we have today, and how that relates into agents, and also into proving that we're unique humans.
So also tying from the last question and whether we're overreacting, underestimating, I think that we're
of course
maybe underestimating the risk of over-identification due to these, we're underestimating the risk that's imposed. Because, if we're getting to a point where platforms are asking for, video selfies for government ID, things like that, that is a point where, so there are some cases where services legitimately need your identity data. So that's banking, healthcare, and they're regulated in how they handle your identity data. And I think, when an unregulated platform demands, say, passport for age verification, and say a contractor, who knows what happened in Discord's case, loses 70,000 identity photos, there's no comparable obligation that govern how that data was collected and stored. And so, and then we'll tie it also into something that's happening in the US, where DHS sent hundreds of administrative subpoenas to platforms like Google, Meta, Reddit, and Discord, demanding real identities behind accounts that were maybe critical of the government. And so, I think that this is it's the problems that have been theoretical in the sort of SSI community around privacy and what happens when you're forced to overshare. The penalties, we're seeing them now. So the biggest concern I have and the most urgent gaps would be that there's the linkability and surveillance capabilities that are baked into whether specs or widely used authentication services. And so in the No Phone Home campaign, we called it latent surveillance. So capabilities that could be activated through policy changes alone. And so that's privacy by policy, not by design. And to be clear, we need both. So Byron Cowell, I recommend his book, Means of Control. He really spells out the idea that if the data exists, it will get repurposed. So on that side, that's an increasingly pressing concern for civil liberties, privacy rights, various forms of our constitutional rights in the US. On the second, though, maybe more, sort of less human focus, that also tied in would be the agent identity gap, the idea that we've built these systems for humans but have almost no standard mechanism for AI agents acting on our behalf. So how do we model the capabilities, delegation chain, and revocability?
Yeah, got it. And I guess an extension to that question is kind of what can we do about these things, Kim? I mean, how do we keep? We're in this situation now where we do have many millions of agents, and how do we start to get our arms around this problem and try to bring trustworthiness and an element of user control back when we're in a situation where it seems like we're playing catch up?
Yeah, so there's two sides, and to the focus on privacy by design, not by policy. To tie in yet another recent example of the Ring Super Bowl commercial that it innocently showed a feel-good commercial about a dog getting lost and how their AI cameras can find the lost dog, but it led to huge backlash where people realized, oh, this probably isn't just being used to find dogs. And so there was huge backlash over the surveillance implications and the idea of data being repurposed. And so Ring was forced to terminate its Flock safety partnership. So the one thing that I think is good is that, in the case of Discord as well, people are realizing the threat, they're responding to it, it's top of mind. I think that's huge that people are discussing it. Utah's SETI initiative, in terms of the keeping identity trustworthy, user controlled, that really points to a better model. I encourage people to follow up on that. It refers to state endorsed digital identity, and it's the model where state endorses your identity rather than issues it. So the individual holds the keys, but the state endorses that, and they have baked in the idea that the issuer isn't contacted on use. There's no phone home and no tracking. And then on the agent side, there's also more work being done in standards development around agent identity that's delegated, bounded, auditable. So the idea that agents need their own identifiers and credentials, not copies of mine. So I think this is, as Ajay was referring to, something that's more like specific, limited, revocable. And and then the one other area that underlies a lot of this is open standards with full transparency on surveillance and linkability capabilities so that citizens and regulators can really evaluate what's happening with their data.
Yeah, very good points. And I mean, you've spent a lot of time kind of thinking about designing identity systems, AJ, as you kind of alluded to at the start. You've been working in kind of, Tools for Humanity, been working on this problem since I think 2019 you mentioned. And when we're designing these identity systems for both humans and agents, I guess we must have some kind of guide when we're building these things. What kind of principles do you think that we should be following when we're building these, or what ones did you follow, maybe by example, at Tools for Humanity?
Yeah, what's interesting about the problem is I think there's like protocols being developed around frameworks for how agents communicate with each other. how commerce happens, et cetera, et cetera. But underneath it all, there's this sort of like primitive or root layer that's missing. Because if you think about identity, everything, the most ubiquitous identities are like document based, and those are easily spoofed, right? And so even in the US, like we have at a minimum 51 issuers, and all of them don't have digital identities or credentials. They're not really issuing digital credentials. And then if you look across the world, the countries kind of fall on a spectrum from some that are fairly advanced. We may actually not like the model in some of them, right? And then there's the ones that are still either paper-based or don't have a system, right? And so when you think about identity or in the future, like the ideal one is like, is one that's inclusive, so everyone can get one, right? Or everyone can have one. It has to be performant, so it has to be fast, has to be easy to use. It has to be private and secure, right? And so those are really the principles that drive World ID. And so they drive the proof of human credentials. So I kind of talked about that. But when we think about other credentials and we think about the proofs that relying parties should get, like ideally, like everyone, when you ask somebody like, hey, you have a problem, great. What type of solution do you need? Well, I need something that's like, low friction, high assurance, and that doesn't impact my conversion, right? Which is like the ultimate kind of like service relying parties perspective, right? And that's really what we should be aiming for. How do we get there, right? How do we get to a point where everyone doesn't need to understand identity? Everyone doesn't need to understand how this infrastructure works, right? So issuers can plug into something, issue a credential. There's a protocol that allows those issuers to interoperate so that relying parties can plug in once, ingest proofs, and be able to, trust the credentials. So some assurance, right? And so that's kind of like the key problem that I was working on at Google and then also working on here. And I think the fact that the internet scaled for 30 years, it was really about internet scale distribution, and then we worked on identity, but it was really around logins and social graphs for about half of that time. And then in the last 18 months, like intelligence really scaled. And so when you have like a very large at scale business and high margin, you can probably do a lot because your acceptable level of abuse or losses is much higher than like a normal business that kind of has to make payroll every quarter. And so how much can you actually invest in tooling, right? So you really need things that are standard, that are easy to use, easy to integrate with, easy to understand, right? And that's really the challenge. And so when I think about the World ID, the protocol, where we just pushed out like an architectural update that enables World ID to be multi-issuer, multi-wallet, or multi-authenticator. And then the next step is, okay, well, how do we kind of make that work and interoperate with current standards? So there wasn't really a standard for proof of human, and now we're looking at what are credential standards, what are issuer standards, what are relying party presentment standards. And what's interesting about like what Kim was saying, like a lot of the presentment standards, like you actually end up sharing your real identity attributes, right, through many of them. And I think there's probably a way to do that in a privacy preserving way, where if you flip the question, right? So a normal UI, at least the ones that we are normally using, like the first thing the relying party asks you for, is maybe your ID or your name, and then they're doing a name comparison and then storing that, right? And you don't really have a choice. But when you're proving something, like why are you handing over your entire identity? So if someone needs to verify your age, they should just ask you a question and you should be able to produce a proof, right? Whether that's like a cryptographic secure ZKP or just a Boolean, like it doesn't matter. It should be private, right? Now, if you keep taking that kind of thinking forward, almost every use case until you get to something truly regulated where the relying party needs your information, you can solve like 99% of kind of the life cycle for users online. And that's really kind of the path that I'm really pushing on, and that's resonating, right? Because what that does is that you solve like a data risk problem for the relying parties that don't need the data. They don't want the data, I don't think, right? Like they just want they want to be able to deliver a good product and run their business, and the answer for a very long time was more data. Why? Because they're trying to make smarter risk decisions, and the way that you made smarter risk decisions in the past was with more data. And I think if we can provide certainty through signals that allow for a more certain decision, then they'll happily push that data away. Right now, within an organization, there's definitely like incentives around different. Like if your entire job is to solve problems using data science and requires more data, then it's going to be hard for you to say I don't need any more data, right? And so I think that those are some of the organizational things and people things that need to be worked through. But you're seeing that evolution, and AI is kind of exacerbating it, where the number of users online is probably 10x it was last year. It'll be 100x probably by the middle of the year, especially with like Maltbot's help. And it's just going to continue to scale to the point where it's like a signal to noise ratio, right? The noise is so loud that you can't really tell who's a real human or not, or a real user.
Yeah.
And so I think
I'd even seen AJ as a kind of stat. Sorry to interrupt. I even saw like they reckon maybe up to about 44 bots representing one person within the next kind of 5 years is one estimate I've seen. So like that kind of volume of traffic's going to go through the roof potentially. Yeah, and AJ, like I do want to come back to kind of a point, which I'll maybe do later about kind of about agents and delegating authority and stuff, because it's an interesting topic. But as we started to get in for kind of World ID, you took quite a different approach, and so we've talked a little bit on this episode about kind of minimizing data sharing and the design that you've come up with. World ID is actually an individual being represented by their biometric, and so. Which is an interesting concept. So for the uninitiated, an individual will actually go to a kind of in-person hardware device called an orb and actually have their kind of biometric captured that way, which is definitely a very kind of unique way to do that, and maybe also presents some scaling challenges. I'm not sure in terms of needing these devices everywhere, but can you talk a little bit about that design, the design decision, and then also how you're able to then keep that kind of data private for users, and how that's protected at every step of the journey?
Yeah, so if we go back to the principles that I just talked about, if you want something that's inclusive, then it needs to be something that's about you, right? What's human about you is something that represents you as somebody on the planet, right? And so whether you're, lucky enough to, be born into a Western country, or it doesn't really matter where you are, you should be able to get a credential that represents that you exist on this planet, right? And that, just fundamentally, like if you don't exist digitally, you don't really have access to services in the modern world, right? So, and I think that's like a very like driving principle for us, that this thing needs to be inclusive. Now, going through kind of biometric modalities, like the reason why we built the orb, there were a bunch of kind of hardware reasons. Like the hardware didn't exist, so we had to build some custom hardware to get the performance that we believe we needed. We also believe that the hardware needs to be trusted, so that it can't be compromised. So having a trusted piece of hardware that signs things is always kind of desired. And we picked the iris, the picture of the iris, because it has the most entropy, the most data, right? And it's something that's like DNA, for example, you leave around, fingerprints you leave around, right? Iris is something that's sort of like, it's also not invasive. You take a picture, right? So the orb is basically a trusted camera, and you have an anonymous in-person interaction. Like nobody knows you went to it. It takes a picture of your eyes. It takes a picture of your face. And what it's doing is really aliveness, presence, and humanness check. So there's AI models there's models that are running on it, and it's actually, and there's like very sophisticated sensors, infrared, RGB cameras, et cetera, and it knows that there's a human standing in front of it, and then it takes the photos of the eyes and the photos of the face, and then there's a code extracted from the eyes. So the way I kind of explain it to people that aren't super technical, it's like, think of your eyes as like a really complex QR code, and you can extract bits off of it, and everyone's iris is unique. Those bits, so the images that are taken by the orb are pushed to your device. The bits are then kind of split into pieces, and stored in a multi-party compute backend. And so the way to think about that is a cryptographic storage system that kind of breaks data apart, stores it separately, and then you can kind of query it, ask it questions. And the question that World ID is asking as a part of Proof of Human is that, have you seen this code before? And so then our goals for multi-party compute is really about pushing the envelope of this privacy enhancing technology to get it to be geographically redundant, have multi-parties running it, increase the number of nodes to something that is really almost impossible to compromise, because you'd have to compromise every single node all over the world in order to reconstruct an iris code. Now, if you have the code and you try to reverse it back to the picture, you're just going to see you won't see the iris. You'll just see like some rendered colors, right? And so even if an iris code was available to somebody, you can't reverse it back to the real human. And so that's kind of like what drives what we're building. Now, the technologies that we're kind of at the frontier of tech. If you think about multi-party compute, privacy enhancing technologies, cryptography, zero knowledge proofs, and then also decentralized identity kind of infrastructure. So how do you actually deliver a performant, easy to use identity experience, essentially with a decentralized issuer, right? Because if you have multi-parties that are holding the iris codes, then there isn't a single issuer. And that's really, it's never been done, super hard to do. And so it really takes a lot of novel product and technical innovation. And so if you look at we're doing a white paper update that should be coming out with updated white paper. But if you look at the current white paper, it walks through the reasoning for how we ended up with Iris, how we ended up with the Orb, why we think that's the right answer, or a right answer, right? And there's definitely going to be scale challenges, because you really need a multi-party compute setup that can operate at the speeds and latency of a Web 2 centralized database, and that's going to take a lot. That's going to take a lot of investment.
Yeah. Thanks for kind of explaining that. And Kim, I mean, sometimes biometrics can sometimes be, I've found at least, a little bit of a dirty word sometimes within identity, and I think it probably boils down to the implementation detail. And you've been in this space for a long time. What are your own views on kind of this use of biometrics as a kind of foundational aspect for proof of human and identity? Do you have concerns with it, as AJ described it?
Yeah, well, I think biometrics has an important role to play, and that is sort of an unfortunate thing that the decentralized identity community has. There is a visceral reaction for sure when you mention biometrics, but as you know, in any sort of many national identity, government identity sorts of use cases, or even things like use of biometrics on your phone to get secure access, it's clear that it has advantages. And so there's the distinction between where the biometric lives. Is it on your device, secure enclave? Is it something that leaves your device? And then I think, as Ajay was describing in World's case, the idea of, commitment to sort of not storing that raw iris code, storing, some sort of hash of it. I think when I look into sort of, and not specific to World, just any sort of biometrics onboarding collection, the biggest things were really not technical. It has to do with the boring sort of procedural onboarding, things like that. And I think that maybe that the reason I wish decentralized identity community would get more involved, because I think when you tease it apart, you can start getting through what are the questions that really matter versus saying like biometrics bad. So things like in a system collecting biometrics, what is the mechanism for onboarding into the system? Is enrollment voluntary? Are the incentive structures such that people aren't pressured? Or is it auditable? And then also, like say in the case of going to the airport, in the US at least, there was sort of we kind of ended up getting onboarded without realizing it. And, in theory, you could opt out of the sort of biometric methods, but, the idea of can you opt out without losing access? Can you actually practically opt out? So I think, the fact is that we use them and, they're all around us. And I think that being part of that conversation would be to our advantage. So, those sorts of design questions are applicable to biometric systems at scale. And I think that that's where we have some important role to play in the discussion, as opposed to just saying, bad biometrics, because they are everywhere and we have to sort of learn how to, what are the good characteristics that we can incorporate.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just one comment on that. I think that biometrics anything used the wrong way is bad, right? And so I think that whether it's your legal identity, whether it's your login and password, whether it's a picture of your face, right? And I would say so tying in three things that we talked about, from an integrity perspective, which is usually where biometrics are used by centralized systems. So I'm not going to, I think from a government issuer perspective, that's a slightly different problem, but let's talk about private companies, right, that are centralizing biometrics. Why are they doing it? They're doing it for the same reason why they keep doing KYC, right? There's very few real use cases where you really need to provide your face, right? And it's probably something to, for example, dating sites is going to want a profile photo. So that's a legitimate reason why you upload a picture of your face, right? And so you kind of have that. And then so there's the centralization aspect and why, because that's a massive honeypot that everyone, and as AI becomes more sophisticated, if everyone starts doing it, the number of honeypots is just going to explode, right? So you need a different approach, right? From a data processing perspective, we have another principle that I kind of talked about, which is privacy, but in there is self-custody. And so the data should be self-custody and should be processed locally on the client, right? So even when we do things like face auth, or when we have a new product, a feature that we're working on, that we've launched the API, but which we call deep face. So it's about impersonation prevention, right? And so one, you're capturing the biometric images on a trusted camera through an anonymous interaction. That data gets pushed to your device, and then anything you do with it is you're doing it in full control, and all the processing happens on the device. Now, this is in direct tension with the inclusive principle, right? Because what's really hard about that is that not everybody's phone is equally performant, right? And so there's a bunch of things that need to be figured out. And so I think that there's a lot of interesting product technology and policy work that needs to happen. And I've talked to Kim about this before, where I really think that everyone needs to work together on this problem, right? There isn't any right answer. Perfection cannot be the enemy of good enough, right? Or at least good, right? And with perfection being the goal, because the trends are going to get to the point where we believe the internet is going to be unusable, right? And so, at least for the things that we really enjoy doing, or things that are really high value, bots will have a lot of fun, but I don't know if humans will,
Yeah. And do you think, you talked a little bit as well about the kind of hardware and stuff like that, and it seems like there's a lot of steps taken to almost prevent the capability for government coercion in terms of the data being stored in different locations, multiple issuers, the user kind of really being the one that can access or prove that that's them. No one else really is able to do that. Is there a risk though with something like the hardware? What steps are taken there? Because some people that might be skeptical might say, well, there might be the location where these biometrics can be captured by an adversary or a malicious government or something. Are there issues there that you've had to overcome or still have to overcome around making sure those capturing devices are safe and not leaking the data anywhere?
Yeah, so I think there's an evolution of the project happening, and if you kind of over time, we kind of have three major drivers for the team, right? So one is we need to build for scale, we need to build for utility, and we need to decentralize. And so if you think about the different parts that need to be decentralized and open source, there's like that is a goal for the orb. So if you actually go in GitHub, you'll see all the designs, you'll see the software there. We've done a lot of third-party audits, et cetera, just to prove that the humans that are building it are doing the right things today, because there are humans in the loop in building and managing this stuff. Eventually, it should be built and managed by a community of developers, so that there's like, kind of the decentralized open source principles should govern kind of what the protocol part, and then TFH will become a developer on the protocol. So today, like, we're a developer on the protocol, so we have our own app and whatever, but we're also sort of like breathing life into the ecosystem, right? And so in that journey, it's kind of like the orb and the wallet kind of share this same technical product problem, is around key management, right? And so like Web3 projects that are wallet based are susceptible to keys being lost, right? You lose your key, you've lost everything in your wallet, right? Well, that doesn't really work for an identity primitive, right? Like, you have to be able to recover, you have to be able to restore, you have to be able to do manage, right? And again, how do you do that without centralization? And so the new architecture that we've proposed in an RFC is really kind of like based on MPC, based on authenticators, and allowing credentials to flow between wallets or authenticators, and then allow the same proofs to be generated, right, in a way that still preserves our principles and the control. On the orb front, one of the things where I would say there's probably two major things that we're thinking about. One is how do we define the proof of human credential so others can issue it, and then how do we and it's different than an identity credential, because identity credentials are really dependent on the issuer. So you still have to sort of trust the issuer, right? Kind of like passports, not equally trusted across every government for whatever reason. And so if you're a human in North America versus South America versus Europe versus Asia, how do you have proof of human credentials that are interoperable, right? And in a way that doesn't make the protocol overly complex, right? Because that's such a basic authentication primitive. And so that's why we've open sourced the orb, where if people want to build one, we can work with them. But really the credential that's minted from it should be the same. And because the uniqueness set is in a decentralized infrastructure, it's really the really hard thing that we're trying to do is how do you build an issuer that's decentralized? And then the hardware becomes sort of like people are operating hardware, but the issuer is decentralized and the protocol is kind of enabling interoperability.
Yeah.
So it's really like super, there isn't like a clear solution for it, but we're sort of chipping away at it. And so things that I when I joined 2 years ago, it was like really, really hard product challenges and technical challenges, no known clear path to a solution. And I think there's been certain things that we've had breakthroughs, and then there's the next set of things that we need to now put our heads against, and we have a community of people that we work with, and we want to work with more people to get there.
Yeah. No, that's a great complete answer as well. And I think you mentioned there as well, like, how can we all work together, AJ? And maybe a question for you, AJ, first of all, and then Kim to come in. But how can we bring this all together? Then we've got World ID with proof of unique human, doing it in a very kind of unique way, but also a way that is very accessible, like you said. Is there a way that we can kind of bring this into some of the other decentralized identity components and tools that we have around things like ID standards? mDLs seem to be growing pretty well. We've got EU regulation kicking in at the end of this year. You've spoken already, AJ, about verifiable credentials and how that fits into your model. Do you have any thoughts about how we could all kind of fuse all this stuff together to our advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I've been as much spare time as I have, or at least like I try to allocate at least 10 to 20% of my time like going out into the industry and talking to people. And so I think like having people proactively engaged too, it is a priority, and we're working on that. It's hard, but we're also like we're now members of different associations. So we're working with FIDO, we're working with a few others, and I was at GDC last year, and so it's really about kind of connecting in and seeing what are the right places to engage. I think there's like multiple parts that we're working on, so it really depends. So for example, like World App is a wallet, and so there's a question like, hey, should we certify that wallet, right? And so now if you have a proof of human credential and an mDL in that wallet, you can kind of generate a composite proof that has uniqueness. So that's one idea. But what's really guiding my prioritization of the product roadmap is really like solving the problems of the relying parties. And so when we have a relying party, that's like, then we work with them on the problems they have. The initial problems are all, at least right now, and probably because of our focus, is bot versus human. So that's really where the focus is. I think as we move forward and they want to answer the next set of questions, which are like, are you an adult? Are you a national of a certain country? Like kind of the life cycle, we'll naturally proactively engage. That's one part of it. And then I would say like policymakers that I've talked to, what's interesting is like, initially starts with like, hey, we have our own identity system, like we'll solve the problem ourselves. And then when they understand sort of the interoperability problem, and then there's a second problem which that exists, which is like double issuance, and then the double dipping, right? So if you think about like double issuance means like the one human got two IDs from whoever the issuer is, and then on the use case, on the relying party side, is that multiple humans or one human is able to get multiple benefits because of that, right? And so that could be free trials, that could be welfare, that could be anything, right? And I think that a lot of issuers actually don't know how bad that problem is, but I think it's going to get worse because of AI, right? And so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't have an answer, is like, how do we link, or not link, but like tokenize, right? So if someone was to generate a zero knowledge proof to an issuer that they're a unique human and there's a credential issued to that unique human, if another unique human came to claim that credential, then they know that they need to do a deeper, right? Maybe an in-person visit or something, right? So I think like there's some really interesting issuer interaction that could happen with proof of human that I think could really be like increase the assurance of digital identity systems. So I kind of view it as very complementary. What the standard is, I don't know, right? Because I don't think that's done yet. There might be a standard, but like, how do you actually make it work in a way that people understand? And so one of the priorities for me, probably, we have a big kind of product push happening right now, but in the summer, I really want to start talking to issuers to see like how they think about this double issuance problem and how do you really solve it in a way that's convenient and easy and preserves kind of the privacy of the protocol.
Yeah, very good. And the same kind of similar question to you as well. Like, AJ was talking about, composite credentials, kind of layering, I guess, kind of, proof of unique human with other forms of digital credentials. How important are you seeing interoperability between like these different approaches to proof of unique human, of which there's a few different projects kind of working on the same issue, and things like, verifiable credentials and mDLs? How key is it that they all work together?
Yeah, I think that's very critical, and really appreciate that they're working towards open standards. W3C, verifiable credentials, things like that as well. And I think we're still at the phase where we're trying to figure out what works for all of these different use cases, and so I think that we still need new types of credentials, proofs, things like that. And so standards are really the only way that we get interoperability, and then also substitutability. So allowing people to switch wallets, and, can a government replace a vendor without rebuilding from scratch? So all of these are goals of open standards. I think to the point of composability, that's one that's really key that I think we've maybe struggled with a bit in the identity world. So the idea that, you have to accept all of one technical stack's proof techniques, credential format, all of that, that's something that, it feels like we're at the point where working towards composability, using the best of the different methods. So whether that's letting proofs do proof things and letting credential formats do credential format things. So it would be nice to see more progress there. And I do think functionally that will happen as the demand for real use of these credentials is happening. And, to the point of this whole discussion, I think what we're saying is that there is more of a need for these kind of what I'll again call narrow assurance, saying one specific type of claim, like this is a human person, but not this is this whole, where I live, my full name, all this kind of thing. So I have hope that we will be forced to make progress on the composability side.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's when it all starts to really sing, when all of these things come together, where we as users get the real power of digital identity. We actually have a couple of questions. We're going to getting close to the top of the hour, but there's a question from Huey, and I've been bad for cutting back over to questions because I found the conversation interesting, so that's my bad. Huey's asking what happens when the biometric basis for the human proof changes. I guess that's to you, AJ, and I'm trying to understand what that means. That I don't know whether there's some kind of change to the iris or something like that, but would you have a view on that? Like when the biometric basis for that, I guess that iris scan changes, is there a coping mechanism for that within World ID?
Yeah, so if you think about like any credential, there's always sort of a reissuance or refresh that's required, right?
Yep.
So they expire. And so I learned a lot about biometrics actually, but like with irises, they actually change over time as we age. There's a few ways that we're looking at solving that problem, or at least like addressing that. Refresh is really, like in day-to-day usage, like there may be certain relying party use cases that are risky where they want you to do a hardware reauth, right? And then at that moment, we can refresh sort of your personal custody package that has the images. And then we're actually in the World ID new architecture, we need to have some concept of expiration built into the protocol that the issuer can set, right? And then when that happens, you have to take some action. And so we're looking at developing that. Now, if orbs have been kind of out in the field for a few years, so it's not like we're at a point. So but this year, like in the next kind of quarter, we're going to be kind of releasing new capabilities that will allow for these use cases. So like step ups to reauth, and then also step ups basically from a relying party perspective, and then also from a issuer rules around expiration and how the protocol will handle that. And so that transparency is there for users, and then they can go and interact with any issuer, but for World, go interact with an orb and refresh their personal custody package.
Got it. And is that like an expiration, like AJ? So is there a set time that currently lasts for? Because obviously revocation, I think, is the other way that you can deal with something like that, where just after a period of time or for a reason, maybe in other use cases, a credential is actually revoked, but you set an expiry date today. Is that like over a period of time, and how long is that?
Not today. So that's something that we're working on right now.
Okay, you said that. Yeah.
So, but for example, if you do tap your NFC enabled passport, there's an expiration of that passport. That should be codified somehow so that the user knows, and it shouldn't be something that TFH would know or World would know, but it's encoded into their credential, into the protocol, so they will be notified and they can update, right? And so those are the things that we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, whatever we're building, also meets the principles of the protocol. And so we have a fairly large biometrics team, so they'll come up with whatever that needs to be, and then we need to figure out how to enable that in that same privacy preserving way that is secure. But we'll be talking about that probably in a couple of months when we.
Well, we'll look forward to it. It looks like every day, AJ, you're going in and tackling hard problems every day. It doesn't sound like it's an easy place to work, but it sounds like it's going to be really interesting work all the same. Well, listen, guys, we're out of time. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank both AJ and Kim for coming in and talking about this topic. We obviously explored kind of world and tools for humanity, their kind of unique approach to proof of unique human. We talked about the topic generally, and then Kim was helpful kind of helping us unpack, other decentralized identity topics and maybe how we can all bring this together as we try to tackle the significant opportunity and problem of AI agents. But thank you for both of you guys for coming on. And thanks to all of the audience for tuning in, whether you did that in person or on demand. But thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Kim.